Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barner. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Dr. Cindie Burkett. Cindie is the Vice President of Procurement for Specialty Dental Brands, where she is busy building out her procurement team and forging relationships with suppliers for the good of the entire organization. So, hi, Cindie. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me today, Kelly. I'm so excited.
Now, I talked a little bit about where you work and a little bit about your sort of high-level objectives. But let's back up for a minute. What else is it helpful for people to know about your professional background?
What's important to know about my professional background and my journey is that it was not a straight path. I kind of fell into procurement, as most procurement people will tell you.
Yes.
And then I just absolutely fell in love. And what's been interesting about it is that I've had many different hats in many different industries and reinvented myself with every single job I've taken. I've had good fortune in a couple of different ways. I've had good fortune in that people have taken chances on me. And then I've also had good fortune in that I've been humble enough to realize that in order to master something, you've got to start in the roles where you're actually doing the work and doing the things. And so I think that's why I like building departments from scratch, because when you're employee number 1 or 2, you get to do it all, whether you like it or not.
That's right.
Because you don't have another choice.
Yeah.
But then when you're figuring out those things on your own until you can build a team, that's how you figure out the cogs and how things work. And this is where you build a closeness with the business. And then that helps you to resist the urge to make insensitive decisions. And so I've really built my business or my profession on building meaningful relationships because I care about the work I do. I care about the people that I'm impacting. And that just makes my job the best job in any company that I work in.
And I think anybody that's doing a job or working a role from a place of joy, right? The output is absolutely going to change. The relationships that they're able to forge are going to change just because of the mindset that you approach that work from. Now, I had been looking and you shared a post on LinkedIn that I thought made an excellent point. You're sort of reflecting back on the process of building out your team and certainly picking people to join it, but also helping all of those people start to form relationships. And you talked about the fact that the laughter and the happiness that everyone is able to share are just as important as the strategies and the output they are able to deliver. And that seems like it ties very much with your general mindset. I also think everybody wants to work on a team where that's the overarching value. But how do you, on a daily basis or a monthly or a regular basis, put that into practice? How do you make sure that those values are clear to your team and that everybody is acting on them?
Got it. So I think you're going to hear this a lot from me throughout our conversation, but it's about being humble. I've made a lot of mistakes in my career, and I'm really proud of that. I think I grew up in an age where nobody talked about mistakes, and I felt like I was the only one making them. And I was so ashamed of that. And that really ate at me a lot. And then I realized that other people made them, but never talked about them. And so when my team makes mistakes, I make them talk about it, make them realize where they made the mistakes, and I commiserate with them. We talk about how much it sucks and how we're going to fix it. And then when they succeed, we high five, and then we talk about how much better it feels when you get it right and how it feels good not to make the same mistakes that you used to. And then we talk about how much they've grown in their career. I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with my team where I've stopped them when they talk about something from a position of knowledge that they didn't have a year ago and say, do you remember when you couldn't even have a conversation about this?
That's right.
And you see this moment of reflection in their eyes where they go, yeah, I know what I'm talking about. And it gives me chills now.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing. And you're watching these people grow in front of you, right? The other recipe to it is I'm a big joker. And so we laugh all the time. We play jokes on each other and we rib each other constantly. This week, I cut faces on my employees and sent them a meme of themselves, right? And they're like, oh no, this is going to come up in a presentation later on this year. I just know it's going to happen, right? And so, like, we've developed nicknames for each other. And it's not uncommon for us to pull somebody else from another department to pull a prank on somebody. And so when you spend this much time together, you've just got to have fun, because you're going to have those serious moments. You're going to have those mistake conversations. You're going to have performance
Of course.
conversations. You're going to have all of those things, and days are going to be tough. But when you know that you've got the relationship where you care about one another, and ultimately you are working towards the betterment of what you do and procurement as a whole, you're building something, that pride it just makes it all worth it, and everybody's invested and engaged. It's
Yeah. And I do think the other piece of it, I mean, the reality is we all make mistakes all the time, all of us,
yeah,
everybody. No one's exempt from that.
yes,
But when I even think about different types of past situations, if you're going to make a mistake anytime, anywhere, the only way to make that worse is by then attempting to conceal it. If somebody makes a mistake and is in an environment where they don't feel like it's acceptable to fail and they try to cover it up, I have never seen that not make it worse. Whereas if somebody realizes that they've made a mistake, or they catch somebody else's mistake and are incentivized to come forward, but in a compassionate and forgiving way, if the ultimate goal is to correct the mistake, you do find that people reorient around that in an interesting way. You no longer have a situation where people are all trying to compete to look perfect and they're concealing their mistakes. You have sort of this thin veil of perfection over a total mess, versus every once in a while having a disruption that everybody learns from together, that everybody has an opportunity to grow from. You can just see how that in and of itself becomes a seed, which over time grows into a very different kind of organization.
absolutely. And I think also making sure that we're taking care of our mental health is really critical
I
in that
agree.
moment too. I had an employee make a small mistake, but it felt really big to him. And so he just beat himself up for the rest of
Yeah.
the day. And I knew he did. And the next time I saw him the next day, I reminded him, I bet you beat yourself up all night about that. And he's like, I absolutely did. And I was like, you know what? So here's why this didn't work for you. You're already good at beating yourself up. You've perfected that, right? So actually you weren't focused on the right thing.
Yeah.
Stop doing that.
Now, when you talk about the joking and the pranks and the memes and the fun, because we work in procurement, I feel like I have to ask, do you only have fun internally, or do you actually challenge yourself and your team to include key suppliers in that fun?
You absolutely need to do that with your vendors. Also have a choice about who they want to work with,
True.
and who they're going to pull for. I had a conversation with an employee of mine yesterday where if you're going to work on strategic projects and you're wanting your vendors to be proactive, everything is very important to you, because you've got your one world. Many times your account executives have 10 different accounts with other people like you where everything is just important to them, right? And so they've got to pick and choose where they spend their time. So an example I've got for you is in my last role, we had one of the key vendors that I took on had major performance issues. And it was one of those vendors where you have to start having those weekly meetings. You don't
Okay.
want to have those meetings. They don't want to have those
Yeah.
meetings. You're going to suffer through them. And it was one of those vendors where they've got the data, they've got the infrastructure, but they just didn't know how to put it together. They didn't know how to put it into real world or impact. And they also weren't used to having customers who pushed them.
Mm.
And so it started off with just two of us, and each meeting felt like a continuation of the last one. And follow ups were slow and painful. And slowly I started asking them to engage other people and bring them along. Right. And so after 4 years, there were at least 9 people in those meetings. And then
Wow.
we shifted those to turn into once a month meetings. And then what's funny about that is that instead of them being corrective meetings, they morphed into strategic meetings where we discussed industry trends, we problem solved, we brainstormed, and then we related. And the way that I know this was fun was when one of the vendors came to us and presented us with a PowerPoint from her vacation
Oh.
that she recently had in Europe. Or when one of our account reps on her day off would come to our meetings just because they were the highlight of her week. And so because we would joke, because we would have fun in our meetings, but we would still get things done, it made people feel engaged and want to make a difference. And when we reminded them of who our customer was, what we were looking to accomplish, and that they were part of a change that we were making, they were all in. And so you
Okay.
can absolutely have fun with your vendors while getting them to move the needle.
So you don't necessarily find that having those really close relationships makes it difficult for you to turn around and say, okay, listen, Acme Corp, but we're having delivery issues or we're having quality issues or we need to talk about your prices. You feel like having that relationship allows you to both build a very strong bond with them and probably accomplish innovative or collaborative things that you couldn't do without it. But it doesn't necessarily depower you when it comes to keeping them on track and making sure that everybody has what they need to meet expectations.
I think in that case, when you're having these kinds of relationships, everybody knows what the focus is. And so you're going to have some tough conversations because things don't always go well. And a lot of the
Mhm.
times, you're going to find that your vendors are just as frustrated as you are because they're often not at the hands of them, right? It's
Yeah.
going to be somebody in a warehouse that messed up an order, or it's going to be a customer service agent that put their foot in their mouth or something like that, right? And so they're going to oftentimes be just as frustrated that their company didn't show up the way that they wanted them to show up. And
Okay.
so if you're very direct and you're very objective about this is what we needed to achieve and we didn't and we failed and this is who we let down,
Mhm.
it's easy to have those conversations because everybody understands what's at stake.
Yeah. Now, certainly procurement can handle sort of whatever happens within their own four walls, and they can handle what's going on at the supplier through that relationship. In some cases, though, you have this third piece where the business might perceive either the supplier's performance or the relationship between the company and that supplier differently than procurement and the supplier see it. Have you had any cases where the business comes to you and they're saying, there's actually a problem with the supplier? And when you look at the situation, you're not sure the problem is actually with the supplier.
Yes, all the time. All the time. It's a snowball effect. And it can be in a variety of levels, right? It could be a small thing, it could be a big thing. Usually, what I find is that somebody has a mid sized issue, and then they talk to somebody else who also had a mid sized issue. And now everybody in the company is having the issue. This is the worst vendor ever. How did they ever get into business? We need
Yeah.
to fire them yesterday. And this also happens when this is pent up and this issue happened 3 years ago, right? And so you've got all of this animosity. And so really what you've got to do in that situation is you've got to pull out the data and you've got to check it, right?
Mm,
Because there are going to be some times where they're right? But there are
sure.
going to be some times where you've got to demonstrate to them that it was a one-off. And so a way that we've kind of tackled that in the past is through surveys. So an example we've had is we had a service vendor where our customer was just telling us that they were absolutely awful. And I had a lot of that feedback. Conversely, later on, I'd pulled some other people who said they hung the moon. So that already told me, okay, there's a perception
Yeah.
issue here. And so what we did is that we got a group of my stakeholders together and said, okay, tell me how you verify quality. How do you measure quality?
Mm,
And then we got with the vendor and said, how do you measure quality? And developed a survey and said, okay, every time a service occurs, we're going to survey the customer. And then when we're done with that, we're going to continuously report that back to the customers. And some of them are going to be the people who said, you stink.
mm.
That they can see from their peers exactly what's going on. And oftentimes you kind of debunk what you've heard.
Yeah. Do you find that when there is either a misunderstanding or potentially constructive feedback, that suppliers are typically open to hearing that? What does that exchange of information generally look like in your experience?
I think with everything, it comes down to your relationship that you've established with your suppliers. I think for me personally, what I've established with my suppliers is that I'm candid. I'm going to tell you right, wrong, and different. I'm going to tell you where my organization is not being the best version of
Mm,
themselves and where we have opportunities. But I'm also going to share that with you. And so I find that my vendors are appreciative of that as long as I'm respectful, right? It's one thing
Sure.
to be a jerk. It's another to be a disrespectful jerk, right? They can
Yes.
handle the first part. The second part is just hard to take. And so if you're coming from a place of authenticity and you're not being self-serving, you're illustrating something that might help them with their other customers because it might be a deficit for their organization. They generally respond well to it because you're not being personal. You're just
Mm.
indicating something that isn't working well.
Yeah. In a way, it's funny as you talk about it, I think of especially that point about if it could potentially improve their relationship with their other customers. I mean, that is huge. I always think of the case where I want to be and also have the friend that will discreetly tell you if there's something stuck in your teeth.
Yes.
Right? Like, don't be the person that allows your friend to laugh through an entire meal with a bit of kale right there in the front. And then you get home afterwards and you're thinking, why did no one tell me I could have fixed this so easily? We
Yep.
all want to be discreetly told, right? To your point
Yes.
about being respectful, we all want to help the friend that's in that position,
Yeah.
maybe sort of this relational way of looking at procurement. That's a thing to remember that if you're pointing out something that could be systemic, you could potentially help their business grow by sharing this information with them as long as it's shared constructively.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, given how much energy you clearly put into relationship with your team and how much energy your whole team clearly puts into relationships with both the business and suppliers, I'm sure you have to make tough choices. How do you decide either what stakeholders, what areas of the business, which suppliers or which categories of spend are really going to get that sort of white glove, hands on, close relationship investment versus the situations that are perfectly fine, just relatively bobbing along on their own?
I think you have to really, because again, back to those relationships, you have to be out there talking to your customers at all times to figure out where the pain points are and understand where there are issues that your internal customers suffering. And then you have to dissect what's self-inflicted versus
True.
what is a product of your suppliers, right? And something that's really important is being transparent again with your suppliers about where those issues truly are. There's one thing that is a pet peeve of mine. And so this is where I'm going to get a little bit passionate with suppliers. And it's something that I won't stand for. And that is a you problem. I've had this
Mm,
happen several times in my career, and I'm not a fan of excuses. I have such a hard time with them, where a company might make a series of excuses about why they can't perform, why they can't do the basics of the services that we're expecting from them. And so while I can be sympathetic to organizational issues,
sure.
I didn't hire you to be part of your bureaucracy or any of your internal politics, right? And so when suppliers are kind of naming those out, we have a very serious conversation about whether the value add is still there or not. Now, going back to your question about how do I decipher value within the organization, it's really got to be operational and it's got to be, I think sometimes it's about the maturity of the organization. For me, where I'm at in my current role, we are building out the understanding of value with procurement. And so procurement sometimes has a bad reputation of being the no police and the you will
Yes.
use this vendor police. And
Mm,
so you've got to be kind of cautious and figure out how do you also demonstrate that you're the resource police and I'm the looking out for you guardian, right? And so to do that, we've got to figure out what are things that are very administratively burdensome to where they are taking your stakeholder away from what their true value is, right? Which is not procurement stuff. Nobody but procurement people love procurement and we love it, right?
and
Don't
we
get
love
me
it a
wrong.
lot.
Yes, we love it a lot, right? And so our goal is to remove that burden from them. And so,
Yeah.
at the outset of establishing a procurement area, it's taking those away. So, making sure that we remove things that are overly mired in process. So, I would say probably starting off with operational burdens for my customer, which often lead to cost savings later on with
Yeah.
suppliers because they kind of flow into one another because you can't help it in procurement. You kind of fall into other opportunities as you're solving one problem.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Cindie, as we start to wind down our time, I want to bring you into a tradition that we have here at the Sourcing Hero podcast. Everybody does this their very first time on the show. So I'm going to give you two questions. You can pick either one, and there are no wrong answers. So your choices are, what does the idea of a sourcing hero mean to you? Or if you want to go a little bit broader, what do you think heroism looks like in a business context?
Okay, I'll choose sourcing hero.
Okay.
A sourcing hero really is a procurement professional. It's that person you call when everything is going wrong, when you've got a problem and you're not really quite sure how to fix it. I'll give you kind of an example of something I'm dealing with now where I've got a director who manages a set of our internal stakeholders. And the internal stakeholder is really frustrated about something. And the director has a strong concern about how that internal stakeholder is talking to me. And it's funny because as I have that conversation with that director, I'm like, no, they're really frustrated. Let them be mean. Let them be aggressive. It's totally fine. This stinks. I get it. Let's fix it for them, right?
Yeah.
And so you've got to be that person that can align with who the customer is, to feel what their pain is, to be able to resolve it and turn problems that might feel meaningless to maybe somebody who's in an ivory tower. It's super meaningful to that person that's in the hot seat who just is tired of dealing with something that just seems so basic, and just resolve it for them, right? It's about finding opportunities to problems that people didn't even realize existed. It's about identifying solutions where people weren't even looking. It's about finding cost savings, or it's finding operational efficiencies where there are things that weren't even considered. You're like a private eye, you're like a forensic accountant, you're like a crime solver to some degree.
Yeah.
You're doing all of these things, and you're a therapist. And so I absolutely think that's what a sourcing hero is. And it's the best possible job on the planet. I can't tell you how many times a week I tell my team how much I love my job.
Yeah. Well, and if I go back to your comments before about your pet peeve, it's not just saying we don't call things you problems. We take a problem and we make it an all of us problem, because that way all of us can solve it together. So you're also living by your own sort of standards around what kind of problems you talk about and how they're addressed.
Mm-hmm.
Cindie, if people are meeting you for the first time through this conversation and they would like to reach out and connect with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Please reach out to me on LinkedIn, Dr. Cindie Burkett. I would be glad to connect with any of my other sourcing and procurement heroes.
Will you play pranks on us? I got to know.
Maybe.
So there's the promise of that. Cindie, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. This is a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barnard. Stay well, and always remember that you can be a hero too.